हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम टू माय यूट्यूब चैनल द सोलफुल डायरी। आज के वीडियो में हम बात करेंगे एल्फ्रेड टेनिसन की पोम क्रॉसिंग द बार के बारे में। पोम को डिस्कस करने से पहले जान लेते हैं पोएट के बारे में। Alfred Tennyson is one of the best known poets of Victorian England. He was born in Lancashire into a typically large Victorian family. His father was a teacher and he had a strict upbringing. Most of the Tennyson children were artistically inclined, and Tennyson proved a precious child, writing verse copying the styles of Pope, Scott, and Milton at an early age. Another early influence of Tennyson was Byron. At home, Tennyson collaborated with his brother and brought out a volume titled Poems by Two Brothers. In 1827, Alfred Tennyson joined Trinity College, Cambridge, where he was to form a close friendship with Arthur Hallam. Both Hallam and Tennyson became members of the Apostles, an exclusive club pursuing intellectual interests at Cambridge. Tennyson's reputation as a poet was established at Cambridge. The years at Cambridge were followed by a period of depression for Tennyson. His father died in 1931, an alcoholic and surrounded by debt. He had to leave without taking a degree at Cambridge. In the meantime, he brought out a collection of poems in 1932, which was not very favorably received. Hallam, who had been unofficially engaged to his sister, died suddenly in 1533, an event which deeply affected Tennyson. Three of his brothers were suffering from mental illness around this time. Moreover, Tennyson's own nervous instability, coupled by financial difficulties, lent a melancholic dimension to his personality, which is strongly reflected in his poetry. After 1850, Tennyson's fortunes took a turn. He married Emily Selwood, who he had fallen in love with 14 years ago. He also got a publisher who agreed to publish the elegies on Hallam he had been composing over the years and which were finally published as in memoriam, a volume which brought him not just instant critical and public acclaim but also the friendship of Queen Victoria. In the same year, he was appointed poet laureate. Marriage brought him stability, and his reputation as a national poet continued to grow till his death in 1892. Tennyson's poems are closely associated with the triumphs and anxieties of the Victorian age. The liberal humanist confidence in progress, belief in human goodness, the enthusiasm about the new discoveries, and the unimaginable vistas of knowledge which opened up the Victorian imagination established the tone of Tennyson's poetry, but underlying it is a note of quiet melancholy and despair, a sudden note of doubt, which, while reflective of his personal temperament, was also part of the general disposition of the Victorian age. पोम को इन डेप्थ जानने से पहले जान लेते हैं उसके कुछ की फीचर्स। इट प्रेजेंट्स द जर्नी फ्रॉम लाइफ इनटू डेथ as if calmly advancing into a new phase. The poem is about death. The narrator states twice that they don't want people to mourn or be sorrowful about their situation. The poem uses the metaphor of a voyage at sea to describe the journey from life to death. Although Tennyson is famed for his poems based on mythology, this poem does not fall under that umbrella except for a possible reference to a pilot which I have theorized may be an allusion to a mythological creature such as the ferryman. The poem was written in the poet's advancing years when he was starting to think about death. The poem begins with the poet taking note of the setting sun and Venus. It feels to him in these moments as though he has been called on. He also considers the sea and what will happen if he journeys there. He hopes it will refrain from sounding mournful and will instead be full of and unable to contain sound. The speaker is striving to find some kind of peace in the scene. The speaker pronounces the day done and his departure looming. This is, of course, an extended metaphor for death itself. Despite his advancing doom, he doesn't want anyone mourning him or worrying about him. His mind is fixed on what he is going to find when he has crossed the sandbar. It is idly his pilot, meaning God. Stanza 1. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me, and may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. The very first line of the stanza of crossing the bar puts the poem in a particular time of the day. The evening star that it describes is another name for Venus. Venus is known as both the evening star and the morning star, dependent on whether it is winter or summer, which means this poem is based in the winter. Whilst Venus represents the goddess of love, this is certainly no love poem, and its inclusion is clearly just to point to what the time is. I'm not sure what the narrator is referencing when he mentions a clear call. The poem is quite dated, but it doesn't appear to be a nautical term. Perhaps this line is meant to be taken literally. Maybe it is made to suggest that the narrator's voice carries, perhaps due to the weather or the location, or alternatively, he feels as though he has been being called to by the heavens. The bar, which is physically a sandbar, represents the line between living and dying. When the narrator says there is to be no mourning at the bar, they are saying that there shouldn't be any sadness or complaining about their passing. Throughout this poem, the narrator makes references to being at sea. Traveling at sea is used as a metaphor for the journey from life on into death. Stanza 2. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. The stanza is quaint sounding. It describes the current as very minimal, not very powerful, and does so beautifully. Does this line denote that the narrator's journey to the afterlife is a peaceful one? Dying in their sleep, perhaps? The idea of the full tide suggests that the metaphorical ship being sailed is in deep water. The lack of sound and foam indicates that the vessel is in the deep sea. This might lead one to think that it isn't at the start of the journey but nearer the end. Note how the narrator doesn't say this but subtly hints, leaving clues for a reader like Hansel and Gretel, leaving their trail of breadcrumbs. The third line of the stanza is even more nuanced. It's drawing from the boundless deep of the sea. These lines aren't entirely clear, but it is likely the narrator is still referencing the tide, as this seems to be the theme of the stanza. It then continues to say it turns again home. This suggests that the tide is turning. Does this mean that it becoming less calm? It's doubtful, but it certainly doesn't suggest that the narrator isn't going to cross over. After all, the tide isn't going to carry them back to shore. Stanza 3. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark, and may there be no sadness or farewell when I embark. Events are once again taking place at twilight. This helps to create a visual picture of the surroundings. The use of the evening bell evokes images of the funeral toll, often associated with death. The next line would certainly lend credence to that idea, as following the bell there is darkness. Is this a sign that the narrator has finally passed on? One thing is clear, and that is that the narrator doesn't want people to make a big deal out of their passing, as they reiterate the sentiment from the first stanza of the poem by saying that they don't want sadness. Their passing to the other side is referred to as embarking. This fits in nicely with the nautical theme. It almost sounds like the experience is an adventure, which holds the contrast with the descriptions that have made the episode seem serene and peaceful. Stanza 4. For to from out are born of time and place. The flood may bear me far. I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. The theme of time and place are prominent throughout Crossing the Bar. You can see as they have been used several times throughout the narrative. The stanza seems to act almost like a summary, detailing a very much abridged version of the journey that has taken the narrator from their birth up to their eventual demise. When they talk of the flood, I think this is another way of describing the endless sea that has carried them towards their destination, their passing into death. When the narrator talks about the pilot, they are effectively referring to a person that has controlled their journey. This could be a grim reaper of the ferryman. These are characters from mythology that help people transition to the afterlife, but it could also be a reference to God. Perhaps the narrator wants to meet their maker. Crossing the bar is a phrase that essentially means crossing over from life into death. It is also the name of the poem, and the ending of this line gives its prominence. Devices. Alliteration, the repetition of consonants, such as in the line Clear Call. Alliteration establishes the poem's rhythm and introduces the metaphor of life journey to death. Metaphor. The poem uses extended metaphors to compare the threshold between life and death to a sandbar and the figure of Christ to a pilot who guides the journey. Assonance contributes to the poem's varying metrical structure, which mimics the ocean's ebb and flow. Symbolism. The poem uses symbolism to enhance the reader's appreciation of Tennyson's craft and intention. Themes. Within Crossing the Bar, Tennyson explores several important themes. These include death, time, and the sea. The first is the most important and is prominently discussed and alluded to throughout the poem. From the first line to the last, the speaker is preparing for the journey into the afterlife. Each element of the landscape has something to say about that journey, as does his desire to alleviate the sadness of any possible mourners. Time is another important element of the poem and is a reference directly and indirectly through descriptions of the setting sun. थैंक यू। आई होप आज की वीडियो आपको पसंद आई होगी। अगर अच्छी लगी तो लाइक शेयर एंड सब्सक्राइब टू माय चैनल और हमें कमेंट करके बताइए कि आप आने वाले वीडियोस किस टॉपिक पर देखना चाहते हैं। मिलते हैं कल शाम 4 बजे एक और इन्फॉर्मेटिव वीडियो के साथ।